You've probably seen the movie, The Bridge on the River Kwai. 1957, Academy Award for Best Picture. One of the most celebrated war films ever made. It tells the story of British POWs forced to build a railway through the Thai jungle for the Japanese military. What it doesn't tell you is that for every Allied prisoner who built that railway, there were approximately 3 Asian workers doing the same work in worse conditions. They were called Romusha. They were Burmese, Tamil, Malay, Javanese, and Chinese laborers, recruited through deception, coerced through force, transported in cattle cars to the jungle, and worked until they died. Approximately 200,000 of them were brought to the railway. Up to 90,000 of them died. The Allied POWs, the British, Australian, Dutch, and American soldiers whose suffering the movie documented, lost 1 in 5 of their number. The Romusha lost almost 1 in 2. Their names were not systematically recorded. Their deaths were not systematically counted. The memorial cemeteries along the Death Railway are immaculately maintained by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. They contain the Allied dead. There is no equivalent memorial for the 90,000 Romusha. The Death Railway was built because Japan lost a battle. In June 1942, Japan's naval defeat at the Battle of Midway transformed the strategic situation in the Pacific. Allied submarines began threatening the sea lanes through the Strait of Malacca, the route Japan had been using to supply its forces in Burma. A land route was needed. The solution was a railway connecting Thailand and Burma, 415 kilometers through some of the densest jungle and most difficult terrain in Southeast Asia, crossing mountains, valleys, and rivers that had defeated every previous attempt to survey a viable route. A pre-war British survey had estimated that building such a railway would take 5 years under normal conditions. Japan planned to build it in 16 months. The difference between 5 years and 16 months was not engineering innovation. It was the specific decision to replace time with human beings. By early 1942, Japan had an enormous pool of captive labor. The fall of Singapore, Hong Kong, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies had delivered approximately 140,000 Allied prisoners of war into Japanese hands. Additional hundreds of thousands of Asian civilians were available through the occupied territories. Japan would use them. In June 1942, work began from both ends of the projected route simultaneously, at Thanbyuzayat in Burma and at Ban Pong in Thailand. The workforce was approximately 60,000 Allied POWs transported from Singapore, Java, and other captured territories, supplemented by an estimated 200,000 Asian laborers. The Allied POWs were soldiers, men who had surrendered under the laws of war and who were theoretically entitled to protections under the Geneva Convention. Japan had signed but not ratified the convention, and its treatment of POWs reflected a military culture that viewed surrender as the ultimate disgrace and those who surrendered as having forfeited any claim to humane treatment. The Romusha were civilians. They had been recruited, in many cases deceived, into working for the Japanese military with promises of good pay and working conditions that bore no relationship to what awaited them. They arrived in the jungle to find no accommodation, no sanitation, inadequate food, and medical care that was essentially non-existent. By mid-1943, the railway was behind schedule. Japan's response to the schedule delay was the Speedo period, a command to accelerate construction regardless of the human cost. During the Speedo period, which ran from approximately July to October 1943, workers were required to work 18-hour shifts. Rest was minimal. The already inadequate food rations were not increased to match the increased workload. Medical care remained essentially unavailable. The death rate during the Speedo period climbed sharply. The Japanese Guard's enforcement of the work schedule during Speedo has been documented in POW testimony with specific, verified details that do not require embellishment. Men who collapsed from exhaustion or illness were beaten to encourage them to continue working. Men who could not work were sometimes bayoneted. The specific guards whose conduct was most extreme were identified by name in POW accounts and in subsequent war crimes proceedings. At Hellfire Pass, the Kanyu cutting, where workers had to blast and chisel through solid rock by hand, the work was conducted in shifts around the clock. Workers used torches and fires at night, producing the hellish glow that gave the location its name. Of the approximately 1,000 POWs who worked at Hellfire Pass at the height of construction, only 100 were still alive when the cutting was completed. 9 out of 10 had died. If this history is new to you, subscribe to Unsolved East and hit like. New episodes every week. The Bridge on the River Kwai won 7 Academy Awards. It is one of the most celebrated films about World War II. It follows the experiences of British POWs. The Romusha do not appear in it. The Romusha were the Asian laborers who worked alongside the Allied POWs on the Death Railway, Burmese, Tamil laborers from Malaya, Javanese workers from the Dutch East Indies, Malay and Chinese civilians recruited or coerced into service by the Japanese military across the occupied territories. They were recruited with promises. Around 200,000 Asian indentured laborers, or Romusha, worked alongside Allied POWs on the railway. While 1 in 5 Allied POWs died, almost half the Romusha perished. Anzac Portal. The Romusha had none of the protections, however inadequate, that the framework of prisoner of war status provided to the Allied soldiers. They had no chain of command that could negotiate with Japanese authorities on their behalf. They had no senior officers who could advocate for their welfare. They had no national governments pressing for information about their condition. They were civilians in a jungle, working under military guard, in conditions that were demonstrably worse than those of the POWs working beside them. Few doctors accompanied the Romusha. As their death rate soared, the Japanese recruited a handful of medical personnel from among Allied POWs. These doctors and orderlies were assigned to Romusha camps along the railway to offer what help they could. Anzac Portal. The specific death toll of the Romusha has never been precisely established. Approximately 12,800 Allied POWs and up to 90,000 Romusha died between 1942 and 1945. Malnutrition, disease and overwork, mostly attributable to the brutality, neglect and indifference of the Japanese, all contributed to this death toll. Anzac Portal. The uncertainty in the Romusha death toll reflects the specific absence of documentation. The Allied POW deaths were recorded by the POWs themselves, in diaries, in unit records, in the testimony of survivors who could account for their comrades. The Romusha deaths were not systematically recorded by anyone. They died without their names being written down. They were buried where they fell, in unmarked graves along the 415-kilometer railway line, in the jungle that pressed in on both sides, in locations that were not documented in any systematic way. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission maintains immaculate cemeteries along the Death Railway containing the Allied dead. Warfare History Network. There is no equivalent institution for the Romusha. The Kanchanaburi War Cemetery, the largest cemetery along the railway, located in Thailand, contains the graves of Allied POWs maintained by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. It receives visitors every year. The graves are tended. The names are inscribed. The Romusha dead have no equivalent. In 2025, 82 years after the railway was completed, a Buddhist ceremony was held for the cremation of remains from 106 Tamil laborers whose bones were discovered during a construction project near the governor's office in Kanchanaburi. The discovery contributed to a growing effort to map lost graves along the railway route. Wikipedia. The counting is still happening. 82 years later. The psychology. The specific disparity between the treatment of Allied POWs and the treatment of Romusha on the Death Railway reflects something that this channel has documented across multiple cases in different contexts. The people whose deaths are counted, memorialized, and incorporated into official historical memory tend to be the people whose governments had the power and the interest to demand accounting. The Allied POWs, British, Australian, Dutch, American, had governments that survived the war, that conducted war crimes trials, that maintained war graves commissions, that built memorials, that kept the story alive through films, books, and commemorations. The Romusha were from territories that were colonized, occupied, or in the process of seeking independence. Their governments, where they existed, had limited diplomatic leverage. Their deaths were not systematically demanded to be accounted for. The movie got made about the people whose deaths were counted. The people whose deaths were not counted are still being found in the ground. The war crimes accountability for the death railway was partial and focused primarily on individual guards rather than the command decisions that produced the conditions. Following Japan's surrender, a series of war crimes trials were conducted by British, Australian, and Dutch military tribunals. The trials addressed specific documented incidents, the beatings, the killings of individual prisoners, the conduct of named guards at specific locations. 111 Japanese soldiers and officers were convicted of war crimes related to the death railway. 32 were executed. The convictions addressed individual acts of violence at specific locations along the railway. They did not address the command decisions that had established the conditions, the 18-hour shifts, the inadequate food rations, the absence of medical care, the Speedo policy that had converted a construction project into a death march. The officers who had made those decisions were not, for the most part, prosecuted for those decisions. General Hideki Tojo, Japan's wartime prime minister and effective head of the military government, was tried at the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal for overall command responsibility and executed in 1948. His trial addressed the broader conduct of the Pacific War rather than the specific conditions of the death railway. The compensation that followed was, as this channel has documented repeatedly, inadequate by the assessment of those who received it. In general, although some reparations were paid to some independent countries, no compensation or reparations have been provided to the Southeast Asian laborers. The 1951 compensation to Allied POWs was seen as lacking. One former POW was given £76. Wikipedia. £76. For the specific experience of building a Japanese military railway through the jungle, watching comrades die, surviving conditions that killed 1 in 5 of your fellow soldiers. The Romusha received nothing. The countries from which they came, Burma, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, were not in a position to press for compensation in the way that Australia, Britain, and the Netherlands were. The colonial and post-colonial dynamics of the post-war settlement meant that the people who had suffered most were the least positioned to demand accounting. Japan signed treaty agreements with Burma and Indonesia. The specific provision for Romusha compensation was not a priority in those agreements. It has never been addressed. The bridge on the River Kwai is still there. A rebuilt version of it, the original was bombed by the Royal Air Force in 1945, spans the Kwai River near Kanchanaburi in Thailand. Tourists visit it every year. They walk across it. They take photographs. The town of Kanchanaburi has a death railway museum, a war cemetery, a sound and light show at the bridge every year in late November commemorating the Allied prisoners who built it. The death railway is a tourist attraction now. The film is still watched. Today, the railway remains a symbol of endurance, sacrifice, and the brutality of war. Memorials such as the Hellfire Pass Museum and the Kanchanaburi War Cemetery serve as lasting reminders of the men who endured such unimaginable hardship. History. The men the memorials remember are primarily the Allied men. The 90,000 Romusha who died in the same jungle, building the same railway, dying at twice the rate of the Allied soldiers beside them, they are memorialized in a way that reflects their place in the historical record. Which is to say, incompletely. In fragments. In discoveries still being made 80 years later. In 2025, 106 Tamil laborers were found in the ground near Kanchanaburi, bones discovered during construction work, identified as Romusha from the death railway period by their location and context, finally receiving a Buddhist cremation ceremony that came 82 years after they died in the jungle. There are more in the ground. The mapping is incomplete. The counting is unfinished. The bridge is a tourist attraction. The film won 7 Oscars. 90,000 people died without their names being written down. Some of them are still being found.